I'm going no on this. Oh, split.
I think I might be wishful thinking.
Okay.
Welcome to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Tiana Lodesher.
And I'm Christian Daytok.
Each week, we give our takes on the latest headlines in the news, and you get to vote with who you agree. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We start this week above the fold. Christian, what's the top story you're focusing on this week?
Well, late last week, I sat down for an exclusive interview with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. You should go check it out on the YouTube channel, and it's fascinating. We talked about his beef with Elon Musk, the fallout from the deadly DC plane crash. But there's one segment in particular that I want to put a focus on. Check it out.
Let's make sure that next generation of transportation, whether it's again, autonomous, or whether it's in an eVTOL or it's, a drone technology, that happens here. And the testing happens here. And then the jobs that are created around that industry are American jobs. If we don't, you've already looked at China. And if China actually develops this technology and we import it here, and you have cameras and sensors on these drones or autonomous vehicles, that is a huge problem. That is a national security risk.
This is a pretty significant shift on automation from Trump's first term in office. Back then, you had thought leaders like Tucker Carlson talking about how self-driving cars and drones would decimate the trucking industry. But what caused this break? Obviously, you have tons of money in Silicon Valley backing Trump, plus Musk himself right now. But if you pay attention to Duffy's words, he wrapped this whole debate around China. National security and China is running all of Donald Trump's policy decisions. It's something that I do think he can get help from the other side of the aisle on. And as we move down the line, this technology could actually boost jobs here in America. It's an interesting dilemma and one that I didn't expect going into that interview.
I mean, Christian, you know me, I'm Scrooge McDuck, so I'm totally aligned with Duffy here. But this is a recurring theme that we discussed at the end of last year. The idea of this total ideological civil war and polarization within the Trump administration. Because what Duffy is expressing here, which I believe is the correct belief that a rising tide lifts all boats, that going forward with technological advancement advances the economy and does create jobs, is totally incongruous with what you're hearing Peter Navarro saying about tariffs and J.D. Vance saying about we need to bring back old school manufacturing jobs. And I know we'll get to more of the trade war in a moment, but what do you think it says that Duffy has no qualms about expressing this, pro-growth, pro-development worldview, which again, I think is the correct one, but with no compunction when you consider what other parts of the Trump administration is saying?
Well, you can sort of describe it in two opposing ways, Tiana. The first is, I think, what you hit on. You have sort of these ideological camps within the cabinet, which is good. We want multilateralism. We don't want groupthink. This is how you sort of whittle down and improve ideas and implementation strategy. So I like that in that regard. The bad way to look at this is that Donald Trump is simply checked out, right? He doesn't necessarily care about what's happening at these individual departments, and he's letting the secretaries or the agency heads sort of take the lead on dictating their own policy. I'm not sure which one of these explanations is true. In reality, it's probably a little bit of both. But at least I think this is a good idea or a good development in terms of a non-talked about agency like transportation, which in reality impacts everyday Americans quite literally every day. When you're talking about how do you get to work? Do you take a new highway? Do you take the subway? Obviously, we saw the deadly plane crash in January and their efforts to improve safety in that regard. This is something where Donald Trump can reach across the aisle, take down the temperature and say, again, we are trying to innovate. We're not trying to go back to the past. Progressives, you're always calling for progress. This is an area where there could be some real bipartisan accord, I think.
Some Ezra Klein style abundance here, right? Maybe we could get, the more moderate Dems on board. And Christian, this is a pretty good foray into what I'm focusing on. The idea that what does Trump really care about during this presidency? Where is he showing leadership and whatnot?
Well, so is that the story you're going to be talking about? Was that a tee-up for something down the line? What's the big one on your plate this week, Tiana?
We are more than 2 months into the Trump administration, and yet we still have not seen the text of the One Big Beautiful Bill. There was a report from Axios that House Republicans are considering increasing the corporate tax rate in order to pay for it. I want to be clear, this is a non-starter. Any proposal that asks to increase the corporate tax rate should be rejected by any and all Republicans. It is better to have those individual tax provisions of the TCJA expire than increase the corporate tax rate, and here's why. Corporate tax revenue is up 158% since 2017, and that's because the TCJA in 2017 brought down the corporate tax rate from the globally anomalous 35% of a top marginal rate to a flat 21%. That's the European average. In fact, we should want to bring down the corporate tax rate because that is how you re-onshore American business, American manufacturing, and the GDP growth. That is a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Tiana, this is confusing to me for a number of reasons. The first of which is it kind of sounds exactly like what Joe Biden was talking about with his economic plan, which we do know did not resonate with voters at all. But you mentioned the sort of like pro-growth aspect of this, or excuse me, the negative impact this could have on a pro-growth mindset that Donald Trump is trying to trick the country into believing. But like, why are they doing this now? Is it they're worried about not having all of the tax cuts paid for elsewhere? Is it just they think that this is something that could earn them some cachet on the left? Like, what's really driving this?
I believe in part it's the pay-fors. Another part it's because Donald Trump has not shown as much leadership as I think a lot of us would have hoped on this landmark legislation that will not be just undone when it's his legislation legacy, right? And then the third part would also be, I'm assuming, the influence of J.D. Vance and Peter Navarro, right?
Yeah.
So the way the tax cut was done in 2017 was that corporate tax rate was made permanent, and intentionally, as a pay-for, you had the individual provisions expire because everyone understood that the individual tax cuts are politically very popular, whereas the corporate tax rate, you have to explain in a lot of economic jargon, and we're catering to a country that it does not speak the language of pro-growth and a rising tide lifting all boats. The pay-fors now, so you already have the $4 trillion price tag over the course of a decade of just salvaging the expiring tax rates. And to be clear, it would be very devastating if we did let those provisions expire. It would be a tax hike on 62% of Americans, and there is a small business tax rate that's pegged to individual taxes for companies that don't have the means to fully incorporate small businesses,
Right.
where it's giving them a lower tax rate as well. So it would harm business if we don't do it. But that 21% corporate tax rate is, in the long run, something that's continued to help abate inflation. What they want to do is, Donald Trump on the campaign trail says, no tax on tips. Okay, not great, but you could argue it helps people. It helps have incentive for people to work more hours, which is always good for the economy. That costs about $500 billion over the course of a decade. Then no tax on Social Security income, which is $1.5 trillion. These are massive amounts of pay-fors, and especially when they're saying we're going to increase the SALT deduction cap, we might have an auto interest loan deduction. None of this makes sense, and especially the Social Security one, when you consider Social Security is already supposed to hit insolvency in 2033. That means an automatic across-the-board benefit cut of 24% for all Social Security benefits. This no tax on Social Security would not only speed up that point of insolvency to about 2032 at least, it could also increase the amount that benefits get cut.
That makes sense, and to be honest, that is one of the biggest losing political issues for the Trump administration right now, this sort of black hole of how do we address Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. Yeah. It was supposed to be addressed on day one when Donald Trump promised to sign this reauthorization into effect, and I do think the onus is going to eventually fall on congressional Republicans, not just the White House, to sort of get their ship in order, or again, just lose all of this goodwill that they had built up after the November election. Unfortunately, we don't have a text of a bill to actually analyze yet, but we'll be paying close attention and we'll bring it to you as soon as we get one. All right, up next, it's time for Yays and Nays, a segment where we get to vote on the other big news of the week.
Elise Stefanik will end up back in the cabinet.
I'm going no on this. Split.
I think I might be wishful thinking here.
Okay.
I know I might be wishful thinking here because, Christian, you and I, we focus on the math of House control because it's literally down to a matter of life or death, right? So if you look at the current House split as of before these special elections in Florida, it's 218 Republicans and 213 Democrats. That's also with Stefanik having not left her seat, right? So that's a very tight margin. And the only reason why it's 213 Democrat and not 215 is because 2 Democrats died, which should also maybe be like a macabre cautionary tale to like party leadership. Stop just greenlighting these candidates to run for re-election for 25 years when they have like cancer and are in their 80s, because they might die and mess up your ability to, you know, impede the majority. So if the GOP wins both of these special elections on April 1st, that's 220 Republicans, 213 Democrats. You know Thomas Massie is going to vote against pretty much anything.
Yeah, anything that doesn't include deficit-reducing measures, right?
And if you're doing no tax on Social Security, it's not going to reduce the deficit,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So then Johnson can only afford to lose Thomas Massie and 2 other Republicans in order to pass anything.
Okay.
And that's if they win both elections in Florida.
Okay. I'm voting no on this for a very different reason. It's not about the math of the House, even though I do think your analysis
I guess I
is
realized I
correct.
just explained why I'm wrong. Why Elise Stefanik won't wind up in the cabinet.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say. I didn't want to rub it in your face. But quite honestly, I don't know what other cabinet position would be the right fit for Stefanik, because think about who's at risk right now. RFK, because he's a wild card and you know he's going to come out and say something crazy about vaccines sooner than later. Pete Hegseth, maybe he's on the hot seat following this big signal scandal, but Stefanik is not the right person for that job. The only other place I could really see her coming in, other than UN ambassador, which again, she actually saw significant support from Democrats, not based on her handling of Donald Trump's impeachment, but just her entire career throughout the last 6 to 8 years or so. I forget exactly when she first entered Congress. The only place that I could see her actually making sense is as chief of staff. And we do know that Susie Wiles right now is not only the most powerful operator in Washington, she's maybe, to quote Donald Trump, the most powerful woman in the world. I think Trump is very happy with the chief, and I do not think, based on, again, the math in the House and Republicans wanting to, you know, potentially screw up those numbers, they're going to put her anywhere else other than, you know, maybe UN ambassador again. I don't think it makes sense. The juice is not worth the squeeze for Republicans here. And unfortunately, she's going to be a rank and file member after stepping down from leadership earlier this year, right?
I mean, yeah, so my vote's probably just pure wishful thinking, because I just think
Manifest.
of anyone, right? I'm trying to manifest it. But like, she, more than any other House Republican, has been in the trenches with Trump.
Yeah.
And she provides like very much grown up, serious energy that is sometimes, I think, needed around Trump world. And it's more like, not that Mike Waltz wasn't deserving of NSA, like he had serious bona fides, and I think even Signalgate aside, if you look at those messages, I think they revealed very good instincts on why the Houthi strikes were good and justified, which they were. But like with Stefanik, it's what do we reward in terms of, you know, loyalty is good, but also we want to be rewarding competence.
Yeah.
And like Elise Stefanik is very competent. I think people outside of DC don't realize her EPAC, I think it's still called EPAC, has been massively influential in recruiting Republican women to run for public office. And it's just been, she's also turned a district that, you know, historically was way more purple into a very crimson sea.
Yeah.
So, but unfortunately, the House math is difficult, and we'll see what Trump does with his political capital, because he came in with a huge mandate, a resounding one, right? He fulfilled one part, and that was seal the border, and then the second part, reduce prices and unleash prosperity.
That's up in the air right
We'll
now.
see, question mark.
I kind of think Stefanik's a cautionary tale, right? Donald Trump preaches loyalty among his lieutenants above all else, but that loyalty doesn't necessarily go both ways, it seems like.
Now it's time for us to fill in the blank.
Trump's comments on the cost of cars make you feel blank.
Oh my gosh. It makes me feel depressed, confused, a little bit of anxious laughter, maybe a little bit, because
like, I need to throw up.
it seems like he's kind of taking his eye off the ball a little bit, right?
This is the exact opposite of why we voted him into office. Like, if you look at every single poll, it was the economy, and more specifically, it was inflation. And there are two ways to offset inflation. One is just raw increased supply. In tandem, it's also overall economic growth. So people's real wages are increasing while the price of goods stay flat, and that reduces inflation. And this misses the mark for both of those tools in the toolkit. Let's not pretend that Americans have had an easy go of affording a car. Look, because I am like a weird, I guess, quasi-hippie and like urbanist in my personal life.
California, Orange County coming
I
through
take
over
the
here.
subway every day. Statistically speaking, like the amount of people that get to work each day in something other than their own personal vehicle, it's under 10% of the working population, right? 90+% of Americans need a car to get to work. It is not a luxury. It is not a hobby. It is a necessity. And it's the reason why gas prices are always such a salient issue in the American electorate. New cars are 19% more expensive than they were 4 years ago, and used cars are 22% more expensive. So yes, it actually does matter if we make that number even worse. People that already felt like they were drowning under the disaster that was Bidenomics, is it worth making everybody pay more so we can give, Democrat union members in Detroit a few more jobs?
I'm going to amend my answer a little bit. This actually makes me feel anger now that I'm thinking about it. And it's not specifically at Donald Trump alone. It's anger with political leadership in America on both sides of the aisle. We've talked about this at length. A major failing of Joe Biden's presidency was his inability to either empathize with people's actual financial situations or message effectively about how your situation can improve if we stick to this plan, right? Donald Trump right now, when he says, I don't really care if prices go up on cars, he is not understanding what normal people, like you're saying, I'm taking the economics out of it and just going from like a normal, regular guy perspective. That sounds not only flippant, it sounds condescending, it sounds like you are better than someone who has to worry about buying a used car so you can go to your job or you can take your kids to school or anything like that. And I do think there is a sense of anger. We saw it in the Republican Party back in 2010, 2012, that led to the Tea Party, that eventually led to Donald Trump. Democrats are dealing with their own frustrations with party leadership right now, but there is an undercurrent of anger in this country from the electorate to our elected leadership. And I don't know how this ends, right? It's a little scary because no one wants to see revolution. But I kind of feel like that's where we're going to when both party continues to sell out everyday Americans, regardless of who's in the White House.
And if Trump does go through with, we'll see what happens on Liberation Day, if it is as sweeping and, lacks exemptions as he claims it will be the second consecutive presidency where the president willfully defied the mandate they had entering office. Right? Joe Biden was just supposed to be normie Obama, return to normalcy, bring back dignity to the office.
For 4 years.
And for 4 years, and decided, I'm going to be the most revolutionary president since FDR, and also, screw you, I'm running for a second term. And Trump came in to basically make it 2019 again, right? Make it 2019 again, but more bullish on China. And in the polls, it shows voters, they may not understand the minutia of how these things work, but they broadly get, okay, we don't mind paying a little bit of an economic price to have a long-term pivot away from China on the basis of national security. But just to shore up some jobs in, Flint, Michigan, that they're not willing to pay for. Peter Navarro's saying the tariffs are going to raise $600 billion a year. Not only is that a tax hike of $7,000 a year per family of four, it's also completely undoing all the tax cuts, right?
Yeah.
The TCJA extension is $4 trillion worth of tax cuts over the decade. Peter Navarro saying this is going to be $6 trillion worth of tax hikes because that's what tariffs are. They are tax hikes. And if it's a diplomatic tool or a national security tool, that's one thing. But if it's just to fulfill their delusional fallacy of autarky, people will revolt. And the only issue for the country is that I don't know if Democrats believe that they're a viable option right now as an opposition party.
Anyway, that's all the time we've got for this week. Don't forget to let us know in the comments who you think won this week's clash. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and in the meantime, go check out more great reporting at washingtonexaminer.com. I'm Christian Daytalk.
I'm Tiana Lodesher.
And we'll see you guys next week.